I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror, because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a philosopher in Greeley, Colorado, and with me is TJ Wilson, businessman, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
Today we have a guest.
Hooray.
Perhaps our favorite guest.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Not perhaps.
You're in the running. You're going to fight for that one, Sean.
Who do I have to fight? Because I know you've had some really great guests.
Michael Shahan, probably.
Michael Shahan? Yeah. Okay. If it were Suzanne, I think I could take her.
Might have to arm wrestle my wife. There's a few.
Yeah.
Well, Sean Palmer has written a book. It's called Speaking by the Numbers, and we're going to talk shop about it and some of the depthier concepts, and super excited for this conversation. Sean's book is for professional speakers. We're going to take a lot of the concepts and talk through them in the context of relationships. First of all, Sean's book is fantastic. Second, the intro is worth the price of the book, and that's actually where I wanted to zero in. We're going to just hit a bunch of the highlights in the intro. And for those of you who get into this, that book's out there and it's amazing. So we're going to talk about relationships and communicating with people that we care about. And that's what I got. You got anything before we get rolling, TJ?
I do want to say, like, this book it's written for speakers and public communicators. But one of the things that really stands out to me through this book is that it's a really good example of how the Enneagram can be applied to your life in ways that like help you expand your vision of people around you. And I think that can be a universal approach. This is going to be a great example. Like, it's for speakers and communicators, but it's a great example of how to like I'm a barista and I need to understand that the people who come into my store see things differently than I do. And I think that this works in so many different areas. And I'm really glad that this exists. So good work, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you for reading copies while I was in the process of writing, offering endorsements, keeping me on track with my Star Wars references.
Important work.
And so one of those things that couldn't have been done without you two guys, who are two of the most knowledgeable Enneagram theorists, which is what I'm calling myself now. Because I don't like the word expert. I'm calling myself an Enneagram theorist.
I like that.
Enneagram theorist that I know. So appreciate that very much.
Love it. We need just as a side note, there needs to be a book about Enneagram theory, about all the schools and who's landing where. What are the big? Maybe we could do a top 10 podcast on that. Here are some of the backroom fights between people. Fights isn't the right word.
Yeah, I was going to say
discussions.
That would be called
tug of wars.
Who's suing who right now?
It's the I said this first podcast, or you get this wrong.
That book does not interest me at all. It sounds like a book about fights.
There is something, the metaphor that hit me going through the book is when communicating with an audience or with another person, it can be incredibly valuable to know what language they speak.
Yeah.
If you don't know what language they speak, it may be very difficult to actually communicate. And obviously, we can't type the person in front of us. We have to hear that from them. As a public speaker, if you have a room of more than 50 people, you can probably assume that all 9 types are represented. So that can be a little bit easier. But one of the true joys, and TJ already hinted at this, of knowing someone else's type, if you have some experience in the Enneagram, is that you can speak a language they will understand and at least form yourself, condition yourself, train yourself to be able to meet them in that space. In fact, as I'm talking about this, I'm like, I wonder how this actually works. I'm excited for this conversation. So, Sean, in the intro, you wrote, I encourage you to do more than dip your toe in the water of the Enneagram, because the Enneagram can become something like a party game. Many people are satisfied with the repeating of superficial and shallow notions about the Enneagram. However, the goal of it is to create self-awareness and then allow that awareness to move us into growth, relational connection, and a wellness for individuals, organizations, and businesses. You ask at one point, what if the reason your communication is failing is because you were talking only to yourself? That's the line that hit me in terms of relationships, because I know what it's like for people I care about to be talking only to themselves when they're talking to me.
Right.
And I long for them to break free of that, because I really want connection with them. And sometimes it's very difficult. So it seems to me knowing yourself and your Enneagram type is obviously a fantastic first step in being able to communicate to others. So what goes through your mind when considering your own type as you're communicating?
Yeah. So one of the stories I tell in the book, and actually the story that birthed the book, was I was preaching, and this sermon is actually this talk's actually in the book, and I was talking about choices. And so the beginning of this message that I was giving was like, your life is not totally, but like largely a reflection of choices that you made, right? Like you chose to marry her or him, you chose to go to that school, you chose to buy that car, you chose to buy that house, you chose to eat the Doritos instead of go to the gym. Like those are all choices that you make, that we make all the time. And so then I kind of, the message kind of goes on from there. And someone in our community, and my church community is actually pretty well Enneagram informed, especially folks who are really core in our community. And she's an 8 on the Enneagram, and we have a great relationship. She came up to me. She's always very forthright. And she says, that was the most Enneagram 3 sermon I have ever heard. And I thought, wow, I still believe everything that I said, but that way of thinking through the world, that wake up, I wake up at 5 a.m., like I have a set plan for the day. I'm a person who spends a week at the end of the year and sets my goals for the next year and reflects back on the last year, what worked and what doesn't work. I have all sorts of productivity things. Like I know what I'm going to do. You and I could set a appointment from a year from now in Colorado, and you would not have to mention it to me again, and I would show up, right? And I would say, well, we set this a year ago or 5 years ago. Like we both agreed to be here.
And I would say, oh, sorry, I got to put on pants. I do not remember that at all.
and we would want you to have on pants.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I thought, oh my goodness, I speak to thousands of people every year, like thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And what if this whole time I have been missing a significant number of those people in much of what I'm saying, because I have assumed that the rest of the world sees, understands, reflects on the world the same way that I do. And this was after, I stumbled upon this after knowing the Enneagram for nearly 10 years now. Right. And that started me thinking, oh, maybe this is why some places in my career, like whether it's a board meeting or an argument with someone, a conversation with someone, that we're just missing one another.
Yeah.
I'll tell you another story. This happened before my wife and I knew the Enneagram. We'd been married like maybe a year or two. So this was, 1999, 2000, somewhere like that. And I was still kind of heated about this conversation, and she was trying to be conciliatory. And she actually used this language. She said, I'm trying to move toward you. Now, what you guys know and your listeners might not know is my wife is a 1 on the Enneagram, and 1s, 2s, and 6s, that is their stance. That reactive, earning, compliant, dependent stance, they move toward people. I'm a 3. I'm in an aggressive stance. I move against people or regardless of people. And so that had showed up very early in our marriage, but we didn't have language to put around it. So to your point, TJ, about just the relational connectedness, like you don't have to be a public speaker to appreciate the wisdom of the Enneagram and how it relates in these ways. It's like, oh, that was already showing up in relationships, that the way we receive and process information through our intelligence centers, which is what the heart of the book is.
You got thoughts on that, Teach, and just knowing ourselves in communication?
Yeah, so like that first story about I love this little bit about that speech that like your life is a series of choices. Everything that's happened to you, like there's your own choice involved, and like I think that you have a sort of manuscript of that topic in there in the book, and and what I was thinking while reading it was like, this is a true thing. I'm a 9. I fully acknowledge that what you're saying is true, but it doesn't mean anything to me. It's like that's one of the things that I think really stands out to me in this subject, in this whole book, is that like you can be communicating things that are really good and valuable and true, but if you don't communicate them in a way that your audience can actually hear, then it doesn't matter. It's like, yes, my life is a series of choices. And you even make a comment about how the 9s are thinking, do my choices actually have consequences like that? And they probably don't. And it's like, that's how I would process something like that. It's like, yes, my life is a series of my own choices, but what you're saying to me doesn't make me feel anything. I don't have a reaction to it. So
and so like, the book is built around Enneagram triads and stances, the fundamental idea that we all have we have these 3 centers of intelligence: thinking, feeling, and doing. And every Enneagram number is dominant in one and repressed in another one of those intelligence centers, except 3s, 6s, and 9s, who are dominant and repressed in the same center. Right. And so the things that I say about 4s, 5s, and 9s is like exactly what you're getting at, TJ. Like, oh, like I could say that about choices, but if I don't attach a deep and profound purpose, then 4s, 5s, and 9s aren't going to hear that.
Right.
Like, and it can't be do it just to do it. It's got to have a purpose that they personally feel involved and invested in. Yep. Like at a much more, at a deeper level than someone like me who's like, oh, that's a good idea and would help accomplish 1, 2, or 3. Like, accomplishment is less of a big deal, and purpose is much more of a big deal.
Yeah. You're you in the chapter on the withdrawn stance, you have a story about the ex-Navy SEAL who did a commencement speech and talked about making the bed. Like how important it is to make the bed first thing in the morning. And that's a lesson he learned from being in the Navy. And it's like, I did not, my entire life, I have not been a bed maker because I don't care about making my bed. That's a whole extra step of something that does not matter to me. There's nothing gained from me making my bed in the morning. Right. But it matters to my wife. And that's something I care about.
Right.
So I'm still, 50% success rate there, but 50%.
But on your own, you'd be at 0.
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like,
I would never make my bed if I was on my own.
And that's one of those places where it's always, as with the Enneagram, always you want to be careful to distinguish between the whats and the whys, right? The motivations and behaviors. Because I ran that by a good friend of mine who's also a 9, and I asked her, I said, "Do you make your bed every day?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "You're the first 9 I've ever met that enthusiastically said yes to whether you make your bed every day." And she goes, "But do you know why?" She says, "Because it gives me peace.
Yeah.
It brings harmony to my house." And so I want the bed made because I don't like clutter. And it seems like something that sloppy people do in my 3 brain, But for her, it serves a purpose that is soothing to her mentally and emotionally that it doesn't for you.
Right.
So I find all those little intricacies fascinating, but neither one of you would do it if General McRaven said, make your bed. Like
Right.
they don't. No one cares. I don't care about what he thinks.
That means
you know?
nothing to me.
Yeah.
I see why that's valuable for you, and it's not valuable for me. So, yeah.
Building on that, there's knowing yourself and why you do what you do and how you take in the world, how you get what you want. The movement to knowing the person in front of you. I'm sure there's wisdom to be plumbed here. But just on the face of it, if the person in front of you does know the Enneagram, you write this, Sean, sometimes our hearers don't connect with what we're saying because it's based on how we see the world rather than how they see the world. And we mistakenly think we see the world as it is, as has been quoted by many. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. The ability to see other people, to see how they receive the world, core to great communication, especially with the people that you love. Yeah.
The so central to that is that when you sit down, whether it is a classroom teacher, professor like you, Jeff, it's a speaker at a conference, if you're in a boardroom, we start that process typically with the idea of this is a corpus of information that I want to transfer to other people so that they will then behave in the world as I desire them to. And so we do ourselves a disservice when we gloss over the fact that a lot of our communication is fundamentally manipulative. And I don't mean manipulative in a negative sense, but we are actually trying to get people to do certain things, right? Like sign up for my Patreon, right? That is a mode of communication to get people to do certain things. And so we bring in a whole bunch of motivational factors with all of that. And when I was in college, I worked for a telemarketer. And so if you ever work for a telemarketer, they would say, back when I was working in telemarketing, it's before the internet, right? Or the internet was very new. And they would say, people do telemarketing all the time. When you pick up the phone and you order a pizza, that's telemarketing. And then what they were trying to do is like lower the bar for us who knew that people hated telemarketing. And so, but like that was a manipulative communication, but they then taught you all of the motivators of people. And so I learned those motivators really well. Like this is how people are motivated because I was a fundraising company. And what they were trying to do is the same thing that I'm trying to do is like get out of your own head and get out of information transfer of what you think is important and try to understand what they think is important and how they move through the world, because it's going to be different than how you move through the world. And if you assume, if a communicator at whatever medium, even if it's a parent to child, if you assume that everyone else sees the world as you do, that will eventually lead to bad manipulation, oftentimes to abuse, distance in relationships, tons and tons of negative outcomes for, let's say, a parent who is a 2 on the Enneagram, who is raising a child who's a 5, right, and just doesn't understand why they withdraw the way they withdraw. And mom or dad is trying to chase them, right? Yeah. Chase them down constantly. And one of them feels abandoned and the other one feels attacked, right? And so when we start to understand how deep this goes, it's an incredible tool for being in relationship, for connecting, for treating people with dignity and respect. Like as a pastor, like my fundamental move, I want it to be to love other people and understanding there are ways in which people feel loved and don't feel loved. And that's rooted in how they receive the world through their thinking, feeling, and doing.
Core to a lot of the things that we've said over the past year and a half have been the real foundation of what Sean's already brought up, the intelligence center and how we receive the world through our head, heart, or gut, and our stance, how we get what we want through being aggressive, withdrawn, or earning. And in concert with those two are what Sean talked about already, the repressed side of that, being feeling repressed or action repressed or thinking repressed. And also how we engage time. We're either resistant to the present, or we're thinking about the future, or we're filtering the world through the past. A lot of that's going to come up, I believe, as we're talking through a lot of these types, how we connect and communicate with them. And one of the best lines I thought in the book was just thinking about speaking as a relational act. Even when I'm one-on-one with a person, I'm not sure that that's what's on my mind. I actually think, and maybe it's my vocation, oftentimes speaking is, as you said, it's manipulation in the negative sense. I hear that you're talking about it in the positive sense, but oftentimes with my kids, sometimes with my spouse, oftentimes with fellow staff members or employees or even people that I work for, I'm trying to get them to do something or see me and I step outside of the relational context that communication is into something else. You got thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say maybe the word for the positive manipulation is persuasion.
Sure. Yeah.
Or understanding. Like that's what we're going for in that, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's we're either trying to figure out together what to do, or I have a sense of what we ought to do, and so we're talking through that.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, and here's a story that actually didn't make the book. Because I speak a lot, I went 8 years preaching somewhere every Sunday. Like maybe not my local church, but like that's a lot of Sundays of preaching somewhere. And I think I got in early from a trip and I didn't have responsibilities one Sunday morning. And a lot was going on with our 2 girls. We decided, hey, let's just sleep in, right, in the morning. And so we did. And Rochelle and I got up. We had coffee. Had a slow morning, read some outside. The girls roused like teenagers do about 10:30 in the morning and came downstairs. They started making their own breakfast, which was pancakes and all that. And like we sat around the table and talked, and they were telling me what's going on. We didn't have to ask questions about what was going on at school or this friend. Like they just kind of like opened up, like spilled all of this. And it was Sunday morning, and I thought, there was such deep relational connection in that moment with the family that morning that if I could have this every Sunday morning, I would never go to worship.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's a crucial part of what I was doing vocationally, and I do think it is being part of a community like that, it at least needs to try to be that relationally connecting or to enhance that relational connection. And that led me down the track of thinking of communication all as relational connecting, which is really difficult for me as a 3, feeling repressed, like to try just opening myself up to that instead of opening myself up to, as a 3 with a 4 wing, I want to do something that's really flashy and poetic and, beautiful. And say, what if this was really about people connecting with one another? And that would help, I think, a lot of the ills in communication where folks do feel negatively manipulated, feel talked down to, feel like they didn't get it. The communicator was either too emotional or not emotional enough, just gave a bunch of stats and statistics. And I had this tool that I knew already in the Enneagram that I thought offered a window to helping at least me do that better. So I wanted to try, like, what if I really worked instead of trying to communicate a corpus of information every time I spoke, that I tried to help people think more clearly, to feel more fully, and to do what's most loving. And that's the filter that I put myself through.
I like that. It's like we don't realize it until we realize it, but we're all naturally like that. That's what conversation and communication is us trying to convince other people of our viewpoint and potentially try to get them to do something else. And once you start to really pay attention to how you communicate and what you're saying and who you're saying it to, and like you start to see that, the way that I communicate, the reason that other people hear it a certain way is because I am trying to get them to move to do something that I want. It's all manipulation, and I think that we can use that for good or ill, and becoming aware of it and starting to inject some intentionality. Yeah, changing it into a means for relation and connectivity can all of a sudden, it's not manipulation anymore. It's just connection.
The minute communication becomes relational, the the sharp points of persuasion and manipulation go away.
Yep.
Right. As soon as it's like, oh, like the most important thing here in this moment is how we relate to one another. And so like, even when, I mean, how does that change just like child raising, for instance? Like, so yeah, you're teaching your 15, your 16-year-old how to drive, right? Like you're scared for your life, right? As they're behind the wheel. So you've got to communicate some information, right? And sometimes, but what if like, oh, I want to make sure that I preserve this relationship, that when we get done with this driving lesson, like they know that they are loved, but what I want is for them to become a good, safe driver. Like I actually do want something out of this.
Right.
When I tell my wife I love her, what I want is for her to know that she is safe and secure in this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it's one of the features of communication is that we're not talking for no reason.
Right.
Right. But how do we make that reason? How do we help that reason, that communication become something that's wholesome and loving and genuine and authentic?
Yeah.
And knowing that people really receive communication differently is huge in that. So we're not like, as Jeff pointed out, like talking to ourselves and just missing one another.
Right.
And I think that happens a lot. I think there are lots of couples whose marriages have either dissolved or are very tense, lots of tension, just because they don't know how to communicate with one another.
And it's become a pattern or even habitual even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a great, as we're talking, there's a C.S. Lewis line in which he says, we cannot see face to face until we have faces. And the image of understanding not only your own face, understanding the person in front of you's face is essential to that kind of intimacy. How often do we actually even miss the fact that we don't see the person in front of us for who they actually are? What a gift. So what we're going to do is go around the circle with how we can communicate with each of the types and understand how they receive our words. We'll start with your stance, Sean.
Yeah.
With the 3s, 7s, and 8s, with aggressive types. How do y'all want to be communicated to?
Well, what we need is someone to help us feel. And that's what we're going to be the most resistant to, right? And for several different reasons. Because what your stance describes is what you're repressed in. So your triad, your intelligence center, like is what you're dominant in. And so we're all repressed in our feeling center. So 8s want to just do. 7s are in the thinking or the head center, and 3s are in the feeling. So 3s are feeling dominant and feeling repressed. And the way that works is like in a given space, 3s can feel everybody's feelings, but they're out of touch with their own, and they don't use their own, even when they know what they are, to move forward in the world. And so what happens with aggressive types is that we run over people and don't know it. And we disregard not only our feelings, but other people's feelings. And so when you're speaking to us, if you're appealing to feelings a lot in your communication, we've probably tuned you out. So this happens a lot with communicators who, I'll give you a story. Like there was a guy who's very well known, and every time I'm at a conference and he's speaking, I just leave because I know before he's done, he's going to cry. And I don't want to say that that's inauthentic. Like he just may be, but that for people who are feeling repressed, like Rings was like, okay, like, what are we doing? Like, why are we having to do this? So we're all repressed in the feeling center, but, 3s support their feelings, with thinking, or doing. 7s with doing, and 8s with thinking. Like that's how we support those centers. And so we're always kind of looking forward to the future. I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting yesterday with some folks. There are a lot of aggressive types in there. And what came out of that meeting was like, okay, like what are we going to ask people to do? I like this because at the end of it, we get to do something. And I go, okay, too many people in here are aggressive stance people. We want people to do stuff, and not everybody wants to do stuff all of the time. So like my friend Richard Beck says, why do church leaders have such a hard time getting their congregations to do things, like to enlist and all of the stuff that they're throwing out there? Because they're exhausted. And we're asking people to do stuff all of the time. Yeah. And that has to do with the way that we receive the world. So I'm in the car yesterday. I get off the freeway to take my daughters to school. I know up above in front of me, there are 2 lanes that turn left, but it's all backed up. And I figure I can hop in the far right lane, drive up to the front, and somehow wedge my way into.
Sure. You're one of those.
I can get in there. And as I'm literally doing this, and I do this every day, I think, oh my gosh, this is an aggressive stance move. Because aggressive stance people move through the world regardless of or move against things. I can't help but move against things. It is the way I maneuver in the world, and life feels boring if there's not something to push against, whether that's a goal or an accomplishment or an idea. And other people, if you're in a different stance, if you're dependent, if you are withdrawing, like that makes no sense to you. And a communicator who is constantly giving their people, we're going to do this next, we're going to do this next, we're going to do this next. There are other stances who are saying like, have we thought this through? Like we didn't master the other thing. I'm tired. I want to go do something else. What's the purpose of this? And you get into that meeting, right? And you get in that meeting and you're wondering why everyone's not buying into your plan. And it's because you're moving regardless of, and there are folks who want to move toward others. Like, so that's the stance. So folks in the aggressive stance demand what they want from the world. And that's, as a communicator, something you need to know, because not everyone's doing that. And not everyone is a work hard, play hard kind of type. They don't look forward. They don't live with a future orientation to time. When you go as an aggressive, no non-aggressive stance person has ever stood in front of a crowd and said, we're going to change the world. like when you hear someone say, we're going to change the world, we're going to reach the city, we're going to that's an aggressive type. Like they may not know the Enneagram, but that's a 3, 7, or 8, because only 3 7s and 8s would say that.
You said that we need to help that, like as communicators, we need to help 3, 7s, and 8s get in touch with their feeling center. Mm-hmm. How? Like if crying isn't going to cut it.
Well, crying all the time is not going to cut it, right?
Sure,
but like they can be, because we all have the 3 centers of intelligence. But like, how do we talk about really tender emotional things well to that group is important? Like I'm focused right now on some folks who are doing some things in Ukraine. And the reason why is because the feeling center, like I can't talk about some of the work that I'm involved with people who are incarcerated without crying ever. Right. And so, I mean, it's there. It just has to be there, attached to something in the world that we can do, something that we can push against.
Yeah.
So
if the message is just feel this, it won't work. If it's feel how important this is so that you can do something about it, that might be a better tactic.
Or like when I hear people talk about like stories, right? And this is just me at my average to below average 3 self, right? So I'll just admit that. When someone actually changes a course of action because of a story that they heard, well, didn't you hear that story she told? I'm like, yeah, that's not enough, right? Right, because it's 3s like me who tell their children, who raise their children saying things like feelings aren't facts. So that's what you're dealing with. Like if you just give that group of folks a bunch of feeling, then it's not going to do anything. But if that feeling is connected to a real world problem that they can solve, that they can push up against, then they become your army to get stuff done. that they have to have something. They have to have some resistance. And I'll tell you, I hate traffic. I absolutely hate traffic. But I live a 30-minute drive from where I work, but it was super not that during the height of COVID, and I'd still have to go down there every now and then. Yeah. And I'd get down there so fast, no traffic. And it dawned on me one day as I was driving down there, like, if it were like this all the time, I would hate it.
You get bored.
Like, I hate traffic, but I hate because like there's no resistance in it.
Yeah.
You know, and like I don't get to say like that's a 45-minute drive today. I made it in 35. You know,
there's no way to win an easy drive.
Accomplishment. No fun playing pickup basketball with kindergartners.
Right. Like, it's just okay, like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what it means to be assertive, to be an aggressive type, is like having that resistance. But if you can get them to connect feeling with something that they can push against, that becomes really huge and a great power.
It seemed to me the key might be to elevating the feelings of aggressive types is to push into their heart's message. This ends up being a place, at least for my child, that ends up commonly being a place of connection. My 8 child, if I'm able to communicate that they won't be betrayed, that actually is something they feel. Or with my wife, being able to communicate that she's valuable, I get the sense that's something that she feels when said correctly and authentically. And as you were kind of saying, it's like, this is where you actually hit the world well. And I'm not just saying this. And for 7s, I know this from one of my good friends, when he hears from others that his needs will be taken care of by them, that matters to him emotionally. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's what hit me as you were talking.
So here's my new thought on the Enneagram. So you guys, this is saying this out loud in public for the first time, is that that our compulsive response is actually the thing that keeps us from getting what we want, right? So an 8 who is so fears being betrayed never develops deep trust from in and from others because they are so worried about being betrayed, right? A 3 who's just driven to be loved for their accomplishments and all, like they will like that's the very thing that's keeping them from authenticity. Yeah. But when you to access those feeling centers, like when you say to an 8, like, hey, you know what? Because I will always protect you, I need X, Y, and Z. Like not all of them are going to turn into a puddle of tears when you say that, but I've actually seen like the tension drain out of people and say, I'm always going to protect you. So you can do, for like my 7 daughter, like we are going to get you what you need. Like, because she's very worried because her sister's gotten into every college that she applied to and all this other kind of stuff. She's like, I'm not going to get it, and I was like, you know what? We're going to take care of you regardless of what you need. And just like the ease of the shoulders.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things help kind of get into that. But also when they are emotional, to reinforce those messages and like to be with people in that. And this is a great disservice that we do to one another, is that we don't allow people to be in the middle of their feelings all that often. We try to rescue them from their feelings. And when you are with a feeling repressed person, just the idea of allowing them to be there and letting them know, like, feelings aren't something you can control. They're only something you can allow. So your choice is not whether to have them or not have them. The choice is whether you're going to allow them or not allow them. Yeah. And they're not going away. They're just going underground. Yeah. And they will come back at some point.
Yeah. I have a 3 friend that no one in my life has ever apologized harder for crying in my presence than one of my 3 friends. And like the work there is, hey, this is a safe space for you to feel that, and I want you to feel it for as long as it takes. And And the fact of you crying doesn't diminish you in my eyes at all.
Right.
A second thing I really wanted to hit before we go to the next stance is the dynamic between two aggressive types, which is which you will know from having a 7 daughter. And I assume from where you work with other aggressive types, that creates obviously a dynamic. If you're both moving against other people, or what was your language? It was in spite of, stepping on,
Regardless of.
there it is. That creates, there is a space you want to connect with another person in communication, and yet if you're moving it regardless of, and both of you are moving regardless of, that will create a dynamic. So what is the clue to great relationships between two aggressive types?
I don't know if this is the answer, but it's a tactic, which is to construct things in such a way that you basically can move regardless of in other areas. Like that's her thing. This is my thing. Yeah. That's his thing. This is my, and like get out of each other's way. So I work really closely with an 8. He's high energy, moves very assertively and aggressively, and was like, okay, that's his thing to take care of. This is my thing to take care of. He knows not to come over into my thing, and I know not to go over into his thing, and it works fine. So a lot of it's just the areas that we are the most assertive and aggressive. Yeah. I don't think people who work with me in my day job actually experience me as very aggressive or assertive at all. But like in my other speaking, writing, teaching, like I'm totally driving the train. So if you have your own lane, at least this has been my experience, that it works a whole lot better. And if you don't have your own lane, you're really asking for collisions, because we're all going to get in the right lane and drive as far to the front as we can and then get over. Right. I have to double down on this question, because that makes entirely, I can see the cleanness of that answer with people that I work with. But if you're a parent and you have a child that you need to parent, that energy, you can't opt for not getting in their way at some points, correct? Yeah. So what we have done with our 7 daughter is that we have been very clear with her about what we are choosing not to care about. And the cleanliness of her room is one of those things, just for an example that every parent has to deal with, which is very difficult for my wife, who is a 1. Like the cleanliness of your room, like we're not going to do that. But I am also an aggressive type. And so if we go to battle, if you enter into battle with an aggressive type, you got to be in it to win. Like 100%. Like, and you're like, I don't know what it's going to take to win this thing, but I've got, because if you don't win, you're going to lose a whole lot moving forward. Yeah. Right. So whatever, it's just like, and so a lot of that really is what's going to be a truce? Like, what can we agree on? And I know you're not like this, Jeff, but so many parents in relationship, like they have to dominate over their kids instead of make agreements with their kids. Right. And it's like, okay, this is going to be our deal. You can keep your room how you want to, but the bathroom, that's just nasty. And it causes other problems. Like you have to keep that clean. We're going to support you in these ways for these things. And what the great thing about aggressive types is, once you give them responsibility for something, they'll just own the responsibility and be like, okay, well, like you didn't hold up your deal, so you don't get to go out with your friends or, get your allowance or whatever it is. And generally speaking, they're cool with that because they typically made the choice to not hold up their deal, their end of the bargain, and are okay with it. So yeah, I think you have to get creative with aggressive types. And here's a great thing about, I talk a lot with people with aggressive types about doing something physical. Doing something physical with aggressive types allows them to bring up their feelings. Just the the sense of doing something physical seems to lower, for whatever reason, the defense mechanisms. And we're all okay until we get defended, like everything's fine until we get defensive. And none of us realize how often we're being defensive. But if you do something else, like, hey, we're going to play tennis, we're going to go for a walk, just to get moving seems, for whatever reason, to help.
Well, I mean, it sounds like both sides need to figure out how to compromise, and you might have to fight to get to that place of compromise, but you're going to have to give something up, and the other side is going to give something up too.
Right.
And that's okay, because in that way you stay in your lane.
And it's fundamentally relational, right? What we're doing is relational. And as children get older, right, like the dynamics have to change in how we relate to one another.
Right.
Because you just can't treat a 17-year-old like you treated them when they were 3.
Right.
Yeah. And if you do, you're going to have a 3-year-old.
Right. Right. You're not raising children, you're raising adults, which is a huge thing that people miss. Like if at the end of this process, you have a child and not an adult, like you screwed up.
Right.
Like you're raising an adult.
That's a problem.
So good. That is, I think, a great microcosm of everything that we're talking about is if you don't understand the person in front of you and how they engage the world in these ways, then you can't have authentic communication. It is going to be a lot of shouting. It's going to be a lot of tug of wars. It's going to be a lot of moving against for 2 aggressive types. And getting into their skin, as it were, and understanding where they're coming from so that you can respond, especially for parents. It seems to me, especially for parents. To give aggressive types something to push against that's not you. Yes. This is a common, especially during COVID. I don't know if this was your experience. There's no other enemies. Like we're in this house together, and I really wish I could set something else up as a punching bag that wasn't me, but apparently.
You can't, because you have to go to a store and get a punching bag, and you're not allowed. The stores are closed. In my experience, what are we choosing not to care about is fantastic advice. And that's been something that it has taken a long time for us to learn as well, but that's kind of where we landed as well. Moving to the reactive types. 1, 2s, and 6s earn what they want in the world. Are thinking repressed. Lots to say about these types. How do you communicate with 1s, 2s, and 6s?
Well, so in the book, I talk about 1s, 2s, and 6s moving toward. And like, that's actually I think, a pretty great way to think about them, in that I could tell people this all the time. When you go to speak to someone, a group of people, like most of the people in the room are cheering for you, right? To do well. Like they're there, they're stuck there. They might as well do well. But the thinking repression. So the thinking repression is about gathering and sorting information and analysis and making plans. So it's not just whether someone's smart or not, because these people are smart, but it's about gathering and sorting information, then analyzing that information, then making plans or like strategizing. And lots of times, depending on the number, like they will get pieces of information or they will get a lot of information and just not know how to put it together. And so having them step back to think about all of the pieces that are on the table and make a strategy that would be actually helpful instead of just doing just going out and doing something. So like my wife, who is a 1, she has had, as I have over the last 20 years, major theological shifts, right? That we just don't think the same way about the same things, but we got there really differently. She had experiences that were very emotional for her, which changed her mind. And then she spent time studying it, right? Yeah. Like getting the background knowledge, but her mind was already changed.
Yeah, her mind was
now
changed, and then she had to figure out why.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would never do that, right? Because for her, like the gathering information, and it's not that they don't do it, and this is important in stance work, I think, it's really about it's not about things that you don't do as much as it's about what cost you the most energy. Like, so the places where we're repressed, like I can do that. It just costs me a lot of energy to do that.
Yeah.
And so it has to be worth it for whatever reason. So the way you communicate with people who are reactive, compliant, dependent, we went round and round in the book about language for this stance. And the way you do that is like you give them time and data to help bolster what they want to do or what they've already arrived at doing. But you have to understand they've already arrived at doing it. So if you start out with, a bunch of statistics, there are this many homeless people living in the city where you live, like there are certain types that'll really eat that up. This group won't. They will be ready to do something before they know why they want to do it. Because they are moving toward problems, a more perfect world, more idealized. And so, part of the deal with them is to say, all right, before you go off and do something, let's come up with a strategy, because we're not going to just jump out the plane and figure out how to build a parachute on the way down.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important in helping folks develop, because we have a lot of things. So I'll put it this way. We've heard a lot in the last couple of years about large churches where there was a lot of abuse, spiritual, emotional abuse, a lot of trauma calls. And I would say that there are probably too many people in the upper echelons of those organizations that were in the compliant, dependent, reactive stance, because they didn't do their homework on what was going on. And they were constantly in this idea of moving toward people, trying to move toward people, gaining energy off other folks. That's part of being in that stance. Like you borrow energy from the people around you because you're looking for a place to fit in. So you get ones and they want to fix things all the time. Twos, they want to fill in the gaps of where things are missing. Sixes, they question the structures in order to find their place. So it's all outer dependent. So I'll give you an example of this from my own life, because my wife is a one. I was about to fly out of state to go speak someplace or do something. This was a time where she was getting up early in the morning, every morning, and she was doing yoga, right? So I get up, I'm getting ready. My luggage is all packed. She's in the living room, right? She doesn't do her yoga that morning, and she's upset because she missed it, because she was, quote, helping me get out the door, right? This happened when our girls were young and she was staying home. I heard her explaining to someone like what her day was like. She goes, well, we wake up and I feed the girls and then I help Sean get out the door. And I'm thinking, you have done nothing to help me get out the door. Like you didn't fix my breakfast. You didn't but like, that's the way she's conceiving of the world. It's like, this is something we are doing together. Like that is much more the reactive type insofar as receiving the energy and the motion of the people around them. Responding to the motion of the people around them. And so one of the ways that you can help is saying, especially like, let's say you work with someone who is reactive, compliant, dependent stance. You can say, okay, we're going to work on this project and this is yours from start to finish. I don't care what you do. These are our goals. This is what we need to happen at the end. But you don't have to come to me and ask my impressions or my thoughts. This is yours from start to finish, because it forces them into a place where they have to strategize over big things. And once you do it once, you build a competency for it, and you build a level of confidence in doing it.
Does that work with twos and sixes? I can see that working with ones. I actually don't. That makes a lot of sense to me. But does that work with twos and sixes? It
does. In that, like, so sixes, I mean, one of the things that sixes really need is because they've displaced so much of their trust in like authority figures and is like that trust visited back to them.
Yeah, sure.
They're like, I trust you to do this. You're going to ask all the right questions. Now, that may also mean with sixes, when you do this at the very beginning, so I'm going to give you this project, right? And you're going to run with it. It may mean that a meeting that for me, I think should have been 5 minutes might be an hour and a half.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
Because I got to ask all the questions about what's going to go wrong and get ready for all of the things. Yeah.
And the same is true for twos. It's like this is your baby. Help as many people as you can help, and you get to structure it like as you want to structure it.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're in a place where they have to strategize. They have to gather and sort all the information and what's important, what's not important. And that helps them bring up that repressed center, because they have to do it because they've been entrusted with it. And that's what they really want, right? Like if a two thinks, I'm really helping TJ, I'm really helping Jeff with this by not bothering them with every detail.
Yeah.
Like they respond to that. We have on our staff where I work, we have several twos. And when they are kind of unleashed on a project with clear deliverables and lots of freedom, they do a fabulous job. Now, at the end of it, they want to get together every person that was involved in it to have a little like round table discussion, talk, conversation, but, but still like they did a fabulous job.
Right.
And that's kind of how you help dependent types deal with, their anxiety around those kinds of things.
Well, and much like we talked about with aggressive types, 3, 7s, and 8s, you need to work on ways to get them to engage their feeling and attach that to the things that they want to do, like give them an action step, but connect it to that feeling center. Mm-hmm. But yeah, much like aggressive types, the work that this kind of thing does is sort of propels them, forces them to engage that thinking space where it's so often that they sort of like 1s, 2s, and 6s not delegate but sort of give up that thinking space in a way, like especially in professional settings and relationships, is like let someone else do the thinking for me. And when you give them responsibility in that way to say like, this is your project, this is something I don't if you need input, I'll help you, but I want you to take this and run with it and do it your way. It forces them to engage that thinking space, to work on that like planning and strategizing and categorizing the information that they aren't naturally good at. It's like this is yours. I don't care how you do it. Get it done. And like there's an intentional engagement with that thinking space, much like there is with what we talked about with the aggressive types and feeling.
But I mean, Jeff, you're in this stance. Yep. So how does that show up for you?
A couple of things that you said resonated with me. It's the ready, fire, aim element of this stance. I think it can't be undersold that we are taking in the world through our intelligence center strongly. So I trust my intuitions, and then I'll think about things later. I'm sure for twos, they trust their heart and they'll think about it later. How would you picture this for sixes? They're filtering it through the future anxieties, perhaps, and then I'll think about it later. How would that work?
Oh, they're thinking about it, but they don't trust their thoughts.
Oh, there you go.
Well, and they don't trust their thoughts until their thoughts are mirrored back to them, right? Yeah. So it's that move toward for security's sake. So it's kind of like the kind of standard teaching on sixes, like when a six is asking you questions that are like personal to them about decision that they have to make. They've already made the decision.
They just need someone to say it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the idea of borrowed energy and the relational dynamic of this triad. It's almost like a finding our place in the world, the mirroring back. It's a compass. It's a map. It's am I okay? I in part need others to at least for me, I need to feel their energy, their responses in order to get my bearings. For me as one, I've thrown something out in the world and now I'm waiting kind of like a ping, like what would you call that? Like sonar. I'm waiting for something to hit me back in my intuitions. And so if somebody doesn't respond, or even if somebody doesn't respond, I suppose I feel that you're not responding, and so I'm feeling that. Or if this is why I love being married to an aggressive type, because it's always there. The energy is always there, and then I can react to it. I imagine the other two types are like that.
And so, Jeff, is funny to me because I have no doubt that you're a 1 on the Enneagram. Like, we've had a 1,000 conversations. That's been made clear.
Yeah.
But you're probably the most proactive, aggressive one that I have ever known.
I'll tell you what.
Like, I just find that, yeah, please do.
Well, one, it's my subtype, and two, I end up really trying to balance a lot with my security and my stress. So I'll push into 7 quite a bit. And because I enjoy you and I feel comfortable with you, you probably get a lot of 7 energy from me. And oftentimes when you and I talk, I'm resistant to this other thing I don't want to do. And so you are a place of freedom and new adventures. And man, Sean, my pal, who's in a different state, who has no demands on me at all, is calling.
Okay. All right. I get so. All right. That makes sense. That's clear.
I would also suggest there's a fair amount of not vocation, but the spaces in which you have, what's the right way to say
I know
this?
I've always seen you at good times, right? It's like we're at a conference together and we're going to go happy hour and we're, sitting at the great restaurant in Colorado. It's beautiful weather. And like the times that the 3 of us interact face to face are pleasant, at least to me. Like, here's a guy who's buying our dinner tonight that you guys have never met, and he's sitting over a different table, but he knows me.
You know what's interesting on this front with the 1-3 dynamic? This is a total side note. We'll talk about this at some point on our podcast, but I move to aggressive when I'm in security. My wife, the 3, moves to reactive. And what ends up happening is she gets very present. And I don't know if you have this experience. When you're secure, all of a sudden things slow down. You can be present. You can focus on the now. That's not where I go. It's all future when I'm
well, that's harmonics, right? So like I think maybe like there's a part where you and I are both in the competency, harmonics, right? So like when you say, hey, I've got this idea, like we're both kind of like, oh, we're solving a problem.
Yep. Truth.
And so like we're just kind of, as my daughter would say, vibing.
Well, I think there's also a lot that should be noted about the fact that so much of your life, Jeff, is spent in spaces where you are in charge of setting the agenda.
Yeah.
And like driving the boat. Like between you and me, things wouldn't happen if you matched my energy. If you didn't take charge in our space, our podcast wouldn't exist.
Right.
And there's a lot of spaces in your life where that sort of like drive the car aggression kind of energy is required of you because of your position. And I think it comes out there, but if you're really paying attention, it's you like watching you work in other spheres for so many years. Like it's really interesting to watch here's my plan. If anyone tells me that I should do something different, I will. But if nobody says anything about this, then this is the plan we're making. And I think there's a lot of like that thinking repression is present there, but it's not noticeable unless you're looking for it.
Yeah. That may be why a lot of ones come across as, what would that be? Like if they are in that position and then they're coming with the plan has been thought through way too much and they can become inflexible.
Sure. Yeah.
Because no other way to navigate on that front.
Yeah.
It's also the case, just to respond or to come back to the idea of responsibility. I think it is the case that 1s, 2s, and 6s, am I wrong here? Often are unlikely to be leaders. They often are the complementary personalities, the dependent personalities, to use the word there.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because I could never in my mind, I could never be someone's assistant or second. Like just the idea that like like this is the person that helps me get the thing done in my life. Like, and there are some people who feel so super comfortable in that, and like that's what they want. And I was like, oh, like that, just the idea that that was my space to hold in the universe would drive me crazy, even if I love the work. Like I'm not here to hold anybody's coat, you know?
Right.
So like the dependent stance, like TJ, you said in one podcast, I can't remember what you guys were talking about, but you said like threes are probably just wondering like, why are you following me around the house? And like what made me laugh about that was like, I have literally said that to Rochelle before. Like, why are you following? You're like, what are you doing? Anyway, let's get back to the, what were we talking about?
Yeah. I suppose to wrap it up, some of the things, given the fact that the 1s, 2s, and 6s in our lives are really looking for something because they are coming with that moving toward energy, the responding with warmth, with grace, with appreciation for the energy that's being poured out toward us can always be a fantastic step, it seems to me.
Yeah.
I've said this in the past, but just to again pair up two reactive types, it seems to me commonly will have trouble if they aren't working on something together,
right?
Because they will both be reacting to the other one. And so in
my oldest daughter, who's a 4, there's a couple that we know that's getting married, and I think he's a 6 and she's a 2, and she just said offhand one night, we were sitting around the living room, she goes, how are they ever going to make any decisions?
She's always going to float. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about that? What do you think? That's yeah.
And like, so like, but understanding, right? Like when a 6 moves toward people, they are moving for security, right? That's the motivation is security. But when a 2 moves toward someone, they're moving toward them for attention. And so if we can kind of know, like, okay, what does it look like? What does it feel like to have someone move toward you? And especially in this person, the nearness. So I think like a 2 and a 6 together, for instance, like they would have really great intimate encounters because they're always trying to move toward each other to gain something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, oh my goodness, when one of them is just out of their normal space and isn't moving toward or is in a stress position, like that could be really harmful. Like that's when things get said that are hard to get unsaid, right?
Sure.
You know, so again, that's why we come back to this idea of stances, like knowing what people's compulsive move is and their typical move. And we're making these typical moves all the time, all day, every day, right? We just, that's the way we're doing it. Is really helpful for navigating a relationship and gives you a language. So, like a 2, for instance, who's a speaker, who's a communicator, like they're going to want to do things for the whole world all of the time to be helpful and to gain attention. But that kind of attention gaining doesn't create security, which is what a 6 is after.
Right.
And like a 1 is after a certain level of autonomy in their move. So we're always kind of juggling, like we're moving toward, this stance is like moving toward each other, but moving for really different reasons. And the better you know someone and the more questions you ask, the closer you get to creating the kind of relational connection that can then actually move an organization forward. Like I work with a 2, and whenever it's time to share stories, it's almost always stories of how they have been personally helpful to someone in the community. And here's what they're saying. I moved toward and I got attention.
Yeah.
And now I'm sharing how I got attention by moving toward. So like when that person gets to speak, like I know exactly what I'm about to hear. So I know how to tell us then, like, let's say we're in a meeting and that's their instinct to do. Okay, what does it look like to follow up? What does it look like to enhance this interaction, like across the board? How do we scale that so that one interaction becomes an interaction that more people get to experience, the type of thing that more people get to experience. And that forces them into strategizing and gathering and sorting information.
Yeah. Yep. Which the twos are not naturally thinking about how to scale. Like that's just not how they're interested in relationships, not in reaching the most people possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Bang, let's talk about the 4s, 5s, and 9s. These are the withdrawn types. Again, when communicating to those in this stance, there's going to be energy. There's going to be a dynamic. What goes through your mind, Sean, when thinking about talking to withdrawn types?
Yeah. So this was the hardest chapter in the book to write. And then I spent the most time with it because this is personally like the hardest for me personally.
Yeah.
Because I'm a kind of in or out kind of person, like do it or don't do it. Like the idea of withdrawing, like I don't withdraw. I'm either interested or not interested. And when I withdraw, I truly want to be left alone. Like, so I'm not a 4 who is like withdrawing to gain attention. So like I said before, my oldest daughter is a 4 and she will come home and like be dramatic every now and then and like go to her room. And I have asked her, I was like, is this one of those times where you need to be alone and withdraw? Or is this one of those times where you are acting like you want to be alone, so we will come get you?
Yeah.
and she looked at me genuinely and said, I don't know. which I love because like the honesty of like both of those could be an option. Right. And like a real world option. So 5s move away to gain security. So it's like, I'm going to take all of the things that I know and have learned, and I'm going to withdraw because I feel comfortable in that. Like I just posted on Twitter and Facebook earlier today that it's time to admit that all the new Stoics and minimalists are just 5s who want to make their personality seem cool.
I love that. I'm stealing that.
That sounds like every conversation I have dropping my kid off at school.
Okay. It's like, sure, whatever. You don't need anything. All right, fine. I was in the 9s, move away. I'd like to hear you talk about this, TJ, to find autonomy. But all of that is about, if you want to help a 9, you have to root deeply into a purpose that they care about. And this is actually why I think this was the hardest of the chapters to write, because everybody cares about different things, right? And cares deeply about different things.
Right.
And so purpose matters to 4s, 5s, and 9s at a deeper level, I think, at a deeper level than it does to the rest of us. Because, the aggressive types will push against anything. The reactive types are fundamentally making a relational move about the people who are around them. But purpose can be like anything. Like, so you can have a 9 who finds a great purpose in their business and they show up and look like a 3 or look like a 1.
Yeah.
You can find a 4 who finds great purpose in the music that they create or in the poetry they create, and they can look like a 1, right? Yeah. Especially because they're both idealists, right? And so if a purpose isn't meaningful to folks in the withdrawing stance, I have yet to find anything that can persuade them toward a group goal.
Yeah.
They'll do so reluctantly, sometimes if they're getting paid to do it. Like, this is just what we have to do.
Hey, paying rent is a purpose.
Yeah, it's a
it's not a good purpose, but it's a purpose.
And so everyone thinks this is a place where communicators who are 4s, 5s, and 9s kind of get lost. Is that they are so rooted in purpose, they actually forget how people work.
Yeah.
Like our motivations oftentimes are like very shallow. I just have to do this. I got to make it through school, so I can't do that. Or they can make the purpose so big that it seems unattainable for the average person.
Right.
It's like, oh, we'll never be able to accomplish this.
Yeah.
And so like right sizing purpose as a communicator, because you are all in as a withdrawing type for things that are deeply meaningful, but that can actually be too big for some people. And interestingly, it'll be aggressive types and like sixes who are the ones who will tell you, right? And you will think, well, this person's like, you're really great at accomplishing things. Like you have a lot of energy. You can help us reach that purpose. And they're the folks going over like, no, we can't do all that.
Right.
Like that's or the purpose oftentimes with the withdrawing types is too nebulous. It's too ethereal.
Yes.
That folks can't get behind it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so what is that again? Like kind of pinpoint that. That's why 4s, 5s, and 9s, in my experience, have trouble setting goals.
Yep.
Is because they have a harder time like pinpointing exactly what it is this particular goal is, because sometimes the purpose doesn't seem big enough. But also because they are doing repressed, and doing repressed has to do with accomplishing things, but also pleasure seeking.
Yeah.
They can kind of wallow in the opposites of pleasure, the dark places, I would not want a 4 or a 5 in particular. Sometimes I would, but 4s and 5, like I can't imagine them planning a vacation I'd want to go on. Because they live so much in the darker, more nebulous, harder, more the grittier places of life. That's like, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. So like when my daughter, who's a 4, and we go on vacation, like she will want to spend all the days at museums, which we all love, right?
Right. But she definitely wants to go to the Holocaust Museum and the Vietnam Memorial, and like the places that they're literally designed to make you a little bit sad.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we did her senior pictures, she wanted to do senior pictures at Rothko Chapel.
Okay.
I don't know if you know who Rothko was as a painter. You can look it up online. But basically, they are these enormous squares of blue and black paint.
Yep.
That I promise you I could do. Like, bring me a canvas. I can paint it black. And we hang it on the wall.
My art teacher wife she's spinning upstairs. She has no idea what we're talking about, but she knows something wrong is being said right now. But also, I agree with you. Don't tell her.
But like, this is where you want to go and do your senior pictures at Rothko Chapel. This guy who painted these huge canvases that are just black. They are just black.
Yeah.
You go in, you can't speak inside. It's total silence. You can't take electronic devices. That's the first thing that comes to her mind with senior pictures, after we spend weeks convincing her at all to have senior pictures.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Deep meaning behind that.
Yeah.
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 I love that.
So how do you get her to, like, it's hard to get her to do it. It's nearly impossible to get her to do anything that she doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
Because she can actually out-argue you as in terms of why it's not important in the universe. So like, if she were to plan a vacation, like when we were in Colorado last year, it took us 30 minutes to convince her to ride a bike with the rest of us. Like, good Lord.
Okay, so here's I think the first and most important thing that I want to talk about with regards to the withdrawn stance is that so we talked about the aggressive stance and how they are feeling repressed. The feeling, or the heart center of intelligence, like this is a thing. This is where emotions and relationships live. You hear that and you understand what feeling center is. 1s, 2s, and 6s are thinking repressed. This is the thinking, data, This is the intelligence center that has to do with understanding and processing information. The 4s, 5s, and 9s are doing repressed or intuition repressed. Like this third intelligence center, the gut, the intuition, the doing center, has so much to do with an ineffable sense of what is real. It's feeling the energy around you in a way that you can't categorize, you can't quantify. It's not just doing, it's also a felt sense of what you're doing and why it's important, and connect, like the connection, using the word purpose, I think is so good and valuable here, that like the reason that you have to connect purpose to doing for these types has so much to do with that intangible, indescribable connection of motivation, of like, this has a purpose. That's why you do it. Like I talked at the very beginning, I talked about making the bed. There is no understandable reason to me to make the bed until you tell me that my wife likes it because my wife likes things to look nice. It's not for other people. It's not because she wants to get into a bed where the sheets are laid out. Like there's to me, there is no understandable reason to make the bed, because I don't care how it looks. I don't care if other people see it, whatever. But for her, she wants things to look nice and pretty, and I can connect to that.
Right.
And so like connecting, not just it's not just action, but it's connecting action to a reason behind it, and it's usually an intangible reason. It's something that you can't really explain why, because it's an intuitional feeling.
Well, I think that's really well said. Yeah, I don't have very much to add to that. Like I said, like I think for me, the withdrawn stance is the hardest to communicate to, because of exactly what you said. And that becomes super individual.
Yeah.
And so like they are the least cookie cutter of all the stances in terms of withdrawing. And how do I get people how do you get people's instinct it is to withdraw, to do anything, or to see anything, or to think of, because all of those, like aggressive people, they're moving against something.
Yeah.
Reactive people are moving towards something. Everyone else, all the other 6 numbers are moving in one direction, even for different reasons in different ways. Right. And then this stance is moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this, like, so I know a lot of 5s who are communicators, and one of the ways that they move away from audiences is by throwing out so much knowledge that no one can get close.
Yep.
Right. 9s as communicators are so disinterested that no one wants to get close as communicators, not as humans, like not as in their daily life, but like, oh, it could be, I have heard so many messages from everyone giving both sides of an argument that we never really land any place.
Yeah. Or we get lost in they describe our 9's communication style as meandering. And whenever Jeff and I are speaking to a room together, it at least 3 times in the course of however long it takes, he will have to be like, nope, come back to the point.
Right.
Yeah.
Because for 9s, it's like, you don't forget this little piece that might be really important to someone.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And like there are 1,000 little pieces.
Try to be all things, all people. Doesn't work.
Yeah. And then, 4s are, this is going to sound more ungenerous than I mean it, but it's like 4s have a wall that's built around them that when they send out thoughts, feelings to the world, like it hits that wall and bounces back on them. And then they have to think about it and feel it all over again. And it's just like boom, boom, boom. And so as communicators, like they just kind of swirl in their own thoughts, feelings. And so they withdraw, like, oh, let me withdraw to kind of figure all that out.
Right.
And then come back. But so often the rest of the world just moves on without them.
Yeah.
And then they feel left behind, isolated. That's what contributes to that, like that feeling of I want to be unique, but I'm not unique enough. And it's not like, well, it's not that no one can understand you, Like we just had to keep moving
Yeah.
while you were figuring it all out.
Yeah.
And people who really love them will come back and say, hey, come join us.
Mhm.
Like bring your gifts. What have you figured out? Like what feels confused and complicated to you?
Yeah.
Create space for all that you have to bring, because we know that you're in this stance that's moving the opposite direction
Right.
of the others. And added onto that, because you're a 4, you are dealing with your thoughts and emotions in a way that really the rest of us aren't. That, I've got a good friend who's a 4, and she says she is incapable of feeling one emotion at a time.
Yeah.
Which to me just sounds awful. like, why would you want to live this way?
That's just the water that she swims in. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, feeling any emotion at any time is a hindrance to getting on with the rest of your life. But yeah, I mean, so I feel like that's the most complicated for lots of different reasons. So, 9s really do need to be challenged to bring a strong perspective to their communications, which means choosing.
Yeah.
Right. Like choosing, I'm going to talk about this
Mhm.
and that's it. Like when on stage, to know like you're not mitigating between two sides.
Right.
Like you're offering a perspective, and that's okay. You have a right to have a perspective in that moment. Like for 4s, I would say like to not forecast all of your emotional depth in communication. Like some of us can go there with you. Most of us can't. And we definitely can't stay there for very long. Like in 5s, need to be careful about bringing up insight that lacks significance. Like just like a buffet of information is unhelpful, even though they find purpose in all of that information.
Right.
So for 4s, 5s, and 9s as communicators, there's a lot of choosing what to share and what not to share, and being very deliberate. That's why I say toward the end of the book, one of the best practices you can have is to manuscript your messages like early on, because it lets you choose.
Handful of things that I hear on this. One is where 2 aggressive types can have issues and 2 reactive types can have issues. Withdrawn types, I think, actually kind of mellow out together pretty cleanly for the most part. But the dynamic between aggressive and withdrawn types, I always find fascinating. It's a tug of war. It's a immovable object, and what's the other one? An irresistible force.
Unstoppable.
Irresistible force, yeah.
And that dynamic of the yin yang going on there is always interesting to me. And you just have to know that's the energy that's going to take place in this relationship, and being able to understand that's what's going on before you even communicate anything. Really important.
Yeah, and a lot of things can be navigated if you know.
Yeah, exactly. The second thing that struck me as you were talking was real similar to the aggressive types. The heart's message really matters for withdrawn types, and all of it is kind of about pulling them forward. Your presence matters for 9s. You are seen for 4s. Your needs will be taken care of for 5s. And it's almost like I'm going toward them with something that invites more. And the purpose is perhaps wrapped up in that as well. I always like withdrawn types myself, because as a reactive type, it just invites space, and I can, I have space to move into that arena. And most of my colors, my best self, if there's a healthy person in front of me, can shine. And so the reactive types, I suppose, can often have a different kind of experience with withdrawn types. But that was my take on what you got. You got thoughts on that?
No, I think that's well said. I'd loved it if TJ had. I love hearing people talk about their types when they come up. They know more about their type than I do.
I'm trying to think about with aggressive types, like when you're communicating with aggressive types, you need to figure out how to attach feeling and encourage attachment of feeling to the doing, because they're naturally doing stuff anyway, and drawing out that feeling and connecting it to the things that they want to do already. That give you movement and helps like force the embracing of the repressed center and like building up that feeling space with the earners, with the reactive types. You have to attach thinking. You have to shore that up. You have to work on getting them to develop and sustain their ability to think well, and thinking about purpose and how to get, like, it's easy to teach to speak to a crowd, and 4s, 5s, and 9s are like, yeah, that was a good talk, and move on with their lives. But the thing that we need, the thing that inspires me most is connecting something to do with something that I already feel. Like it's like it does me no good to connect feelings to the things that I'm planning on doing, because I don't need motivation for the things that I'm already planning on doing. But if I need to be moved in a direction, then I need to know why. I love that you bring up purpose like that. I feel like that is going to be something that I'm going to meditate on for months now, connecting purpose to everything else about my life, because I need to know, I need to be driven, I need to be pushed with meaning, with purpose, with motivation that gets me out the door. 'Cause back to making the bed again. I don't make my bed because I don't care, but my wife wants it to happen. Therefore, I'm going to try.
You care.
Yeah.
And it's got to be compelling purpose. I think that's, lots of things have a purpose, but without meaning, something that's compelling.
Yep.
Like, it was just like, that's a big, so what?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Last thing I want to hit before we sign off is to focus back on us as speaking to others, as us as communicators and the relationships that we're in. Each of the types has giftings, things that they emphasize in their type. Well worth naming, because these can often in our communications be overemphasized. And you had a great paragraph about this. In terms of what we bring, you said, as presenters, Enneagram 1s will tend to wrap their teachings around what's wrong with the world. 2s about how to be helpful. 3s around goals and accomplishments. 4s around deeper and darker emotive expressions. 5s are around data. 6s around myriad paths to security. 7s around optimism. 8s around action. And 9s around peacemaking and peacekeeping. And you conclude here, each of these instances are good and necessary in their own time, but a steady diet of an overemphasis placed on how the speaker sees the world is limited and disenfranchises a great deal of our hearers. One of the things I notice in my own communication, I'll be aware that, I'm trying to improve this person again. And all my language is about, here's the problem and here, how it can get better. And that's often how I connect to the world. And sometimes that can be worthwhile. And sometimes that's not where the person in front of me is at. Do you have wisdom in terms of that balance of, here's a great good you bring, and yet you got to be really mindful of it?
Yeah. So one of the things I do late in the book, I think the last chapter, is talk about like the warnings for each type. And like, this is what you're going to likely do. And part of me just wants to say, like, just don't do that. Right. But I'm a 3, and that would be a goal and accomplishment. Like, I can just say, don't do that. But like, so when you're going to communicate to someone, man, you've only got a class period. You've only got one meeting with the board. You've only got one pitch. Man, it's really hard to do all that. But just start by writing at the top of your page, thinking, feeling, doing. And I want to make sure that I spend time helping people think. So gathering, sorting information, strategizing. Like, this is our strategy. I want to help people feel like, what can I say and do that touches an emotional nerve that, broadly speaking, most people can connect with. So that goes back to motivators. It goes back to stressors. When you speak to people's pain, you speak to everyone. So that as a guide. And then, like, what do I actually want people to do? And how do I harness people who are ready to bolt out the door and accomplish this thing like the minute that they hear it. And I want to offer an invitation in every one of those acts. I want to invite you to think clearly about this, to feel deeply about this, to act in the world in just and good and whole ways. So instead of thinking through, because you just don't have the time, and there are so many people, and you don't have a time to say, like, I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking to ones and 5 minutes talking to twos and just go around the circle, right? But I am going to make sure that I'm rooting myself in the intelligence centers, thinking, feeling, and doing, because that's going to help people who internalize, who receive the world in their dominant center to get what they need. But I'm going to support what they, where they struggle, what's repressed, by including that too. And over time, if you get a chance to visit with the same people, whether it's like you're bored or in your classroom, over time, you help folks bring balance to their personality. Yeah. And then if you know people, say, okay, like, I know you're thinking repressed. Like, let me help you think through this. How do we bring up feeling for you? How do we bring up doing for you and connect you to purpose? But that's when you have the luxury of time. When you don't have the luxury of time, you have to say, I've got to figure out a way to get people to connect with all three intelligence centers in this 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes that I have. Because when I do that, I am going to motivate everyone to live out of their best self and their most whole self.
Excellent. Excellent. It's the book. The book is Speaking by the Numbers by the great Sean Palmer. I imagine if you have somebody in your life who is a professional speaker or just needs to learn how to communicate with you better, this is a great episode to share. We always like shares. Share with somebody who you love communicating with. And Sean, do you like stars?
Like stars like the television show, or stars like astronomy?
Like gold stars.
Like gold stars and trophies.
Like ratings.
I'll put it this way. I when I was a kid, there was a trophy at VBS for the kid who brought the most friends to VBS that week. And you bet I won that trophy.
I'm gonna win that trophy.
The Fishers of Men Award, and I think I know where it is at my mom's house. So yes. From like 1982.
That's great. Well, hey, give us some stars on iTunes or on Spotify, because we like stars as well, and they help other people find the show. If you want to communicate about the Enneagram with us, we've started online gatherings. You can find those at aroundthecircle.org. And that's what I got. You got anything else, DJ?
I really enjoyed this book, and I hope that other people can, like, I think that it has great value beyond professional communicators. I really hope that other people see that too.
Agreed, Sean. It's always a pleasure having you on, my man.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Much love to your family, and I'm excited to see all the things that you're doing in the future here. Where can they find you? They can find me at SeanIsaacPalmer.com or SpeakingByTheNumbers.com or SeanPalmerCoaching.com. Which all go to the same place.
Hey, it works.
He's Sean Palmer. He's a fantastic communicator to communicators. And he's TJ Wilson. He's officially awesome. I'm Jeff Cook. Who you aren't isn't interesting. You go sign up for one of our online things.